Tubers. Today we are coming back to the Peace Shelf and we're going to talk a little bit about behavior management. Now I know this is something that is inherently addressed in Montessori's philosophy. She works through following the child and liberty within limits, which we'll talk about in another post, and keeping them busy with actual jobs. That's kind of her approach to behavior management. Now, the reality is that sometimes we meet and we encounter and we have to teach children who are outside of the norm. And even after a sufficient amount of time in the Montessori classroom, they haven't normalized, which means that they haven't fully adapted to the community that's in the classroom, the work cycle, choosing jobs, being part of the classroom, and all of those things that come with it. And in those instances, sometimes you need a little extra bag of tricks. And over many years of being in regular preschool and then several years of being in Montessori, I found that there were still a lot of things that weren't directly addressed. And I never really liked that because I wanted to validate my students' emotions and I wanted to give them a place to express those emotions. I didn't like telling them not to scream or not to cry, because those are valid emotions. We as adults feel them and nobody tells us, hey, you can't cry. Like that's not like, we would be like, yes, I can. And I never was comfortable telling children that. So I started asking questions, and in one conversation with my director at the time, I said, like, I just really need, I need something more, I need something better. And so we were talking through it, and she posed a question that literally changed my life. And that question was, what lesson is that child asking for? In a regular classroom, when a child completes or masters a skill, they're asking for the next one. Or even if they haven't mastered a skill, if they bring a material to me and they say, can I have a lesson? As long as it's not wildly beyond their means, and even then sometimes I'm gonna sit down and do it with them and show them, even though I'm not really giving them a lesson, I'm still gonna try. And I'm not gonna tell that child no, generally speaking. So behavior is the same thing. Every behavior is that child asking for a lesson in how to handle that behavior, how to control that behavior, how to deal with that behavior and those emotions that are creating the behavior. Because really that's what it is. The behavior comes from some kind of emotion that they're feeling. What lesson are they asking for? That's all I had to ask myself. I started watching the children and the specific things that I was getting frustrated with and asking myself, what lesson are they asking for? What lesson can I give them to practice controlling, dealing with this emotion? I ended up creating a behavior management curriculum completely by accident. It started with some things that are already on the shelf in most Montessori classrooms, but that still addressed a lot of the needs that I had. And then I went beyond that and started creating my own materials for very specific, weird things that kids would do, right? And then as I visited other preschools and talked with other teachers, I would find that they also had weird things that kids were doing. And so we used the behavior management curriculum to create lessons and materials tangible on the shelf that they could use to practice these abstract concepts of dealing with their emotions. So the very first thing we're going to talk about, I'm going to go through the entire behavior management curriculum throughout this year. First, we're going to talk about my absolute favorite thing, and that is the screaming jar. We talked a little bit about the screaming jar when we went over the Peace Shelf, but I want to talk more about it specifically. When I was first looking at this question and applying it to that current classroom that I was in, one of my biggest issues was a little girl who, when met with any kind of opposition, would walk across the room and scream. She wasn't screaming like at me. She wasn't screaming in anger towards me. It was a defiant. It was a stand of defiance. It was, I am in charge and you are not. And this is how I'm gonna let you know. That's all it was. It wasn't like anger or violent, but she would scream it. She would stomp her foot and cross her hands and go across the room and scream it. So I employed two different things. First was that I just let her, right? She's on the side of the classroom. She's not interrupting everyone. She's not running around screaming, destroying things. Fine, okay. And so across the room, I started using a little bit of sign language with her, and without approaching her, because approaching her would rekindle the defiance. Without approaching her, I would just catch her eye and I would say, this means ready in sign language. So I would say, and she would turn her head or she would scream at me again. And it would take a while, but eventually would turn into, and she would come talk to me. So I went to my director and said, I don't know how to address this. Like when as an adult, we scream and we're angry and we're frustrated. We grab a pillow and we scream into it. Can I have a screaming pillow on my shelf? And she was like, I feel like that's just asking for a lawsuit and some kind of suffocation. And I was like, okay, fine, you're probably right. So I'm not gonna have a screaming pillow on my shelf. Fine, what's the solution? And the solution was the screaming jar. This is just a giant can of diced peaches that I took from the kitchen of the school that I was at. And I rinsed it out, obviously I sanitized it, and got to work. I needed her to be able to scream, but I also needed her to be able to scream inside my classroom because we weren't always able to step outside. So I lined the inside with felt. You can kind of see it there. Oh, not really, it's kind of dark in there. But it's all black felt. I just cut out a circle for the bottom, I hot glued it in, and then I took two pieces and just lined the side with hot glue. The can was free because it came from the kitchen, and the felt is like, what, 50 cents a piece at Walmart or even Michael's. And I used probably 4 or 5 pieces. And then I went to Home Depot. Okay, so I did the black on the inside, and then I did the blue on the outside so that I could write on it. That's where my other pieces of felt came from. And then I went to Home Depot and I got this edgy. You can see it's kind of finally starting to wear and tear a little bit. The felt has stayed really nicely. It hasn't moved at all. But I took this tubing. It's just like a foam tubing. And I slit one side and pushed it on there and then glued it. That's it. After I gathered the materials, it literally took me maybe 20 minutes to make. But I put it on the shelf. And the next time that little girl screamed, I said, oh, do you know what I made for you? I made the screaming jar. And the screaming jar became the job that she could do when she felt that way. And that was the whole point, was when children are feeling these emotions, I wanted to give them a job to do for that emotion. The bonus of that is that this physical material on the shelf is something that every child can practice when they're not feeling the emotion. And that was the bigger benefit for me personally to watch, was that children could practice these emotions when they weren't feeling them and being controlled by them, so that when they did get to the instance where they were feeling them and they were getting too out of control for them to handle, they could come back to this. And since they had done it during their regular day, it didn't feel like a punishment, it didn't feel like a timeout, it just felt like a regular job that's always on the shelf and that's always available for them to do. And that was another thing that I wanted, was for behavior management to be less of a punishment, because it's not a punishment. As adults, we work diligently to better ourselves, to better our brains, better our bodies, and better our emotions. And that's not a punishment, it's a goal. So why in preschool do we make handling emotions a punishment? Like that, it never made sense to me, and it frustrated me too much. This solved that. It was no longer a punishment to go use the screaming jar or to use any of the jobs that we created from this curriculum. It was just something that you did. It was part of life. It was part of your day. And that makes it okay to do. So kids were practicing this on the shelf during their day. They were using it when they actually needed to. And that little girl never screamed again. She never used the jar, but she never screamed again either. Knowing that she had a place to express that emotion made it obsolete, because she was doing it for attention and not necessarily for the emotion itself, which I had kind of caught on to. But this job helped her in that way, and it helped other students in the way that it was designed to help them, by screaming into it. So the lesson is that we take this jar and I introduce it. This is the screaming jar. You want me to show you how it works? Okay, are you ready? It might be kind of loud. And they'll say, of course, that they're ready. Ah! And they will laugh. It's hilarious for your teacher to shove her face in a jar and scream. It's hilarious for your mom to shove her face in a jar and scream. They will laugh. And they will want to try it. And everyone will want to try it. And it will be the most popular thing for several days to several weeks. And then it will die down, and it will start being used daily as children want to, and not necessarily as a novelty item that's just new and exciting on the shelf. Because there isn't anything else on the shelf like this. And so it's going to be new, and they're going to use it. So be prepared for that. So the screaming jar is the first in a line of materials that we're going to talk about to address behavior management issues that you might have in your classroom or at home. Because let's be honest, almost everything that we see in the classroom is happening at home too. If you have a behavior issue that you would like a tangible material for, please leave me a comment. I am always working on growing this curriculum, and I have added some super ridiculous, and because of that, really fun things to put on the shelf, because of other teachers asking me, what about this situation? Well, this is the situation that I have. What can we do? And then together we come up with something that we can put on the shelf. And they always end up being really fun and really great. So please leave me a comment and let me know what you're dealing with. And if I can create a material for it, I will. And it just might be added to the book, if I don't already have something. If I do, then I will try to do that lesson sooner in the year rather than later. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed this little introduction to the screaming jar. I hope it's inspired you a little bit to see the behavior issues that you might be experiencing with your children as the need for a lesson rather than the need for a punishment or consequence of some kind. Because that's my goal, is to change the way we see our children's behavior and thus change the way that we address it. Thanks for watching, guys. Subscribe so that you get updates when we post new videos, and we'll see you next time.